Our planet is on fire. Not just on fire, dying off. The United Nations published 2 hair on fire reports, making that point extraordinarily clear after this kind of world scientists coming together and analyzing this stuff. 12 years. In one assessment dealing with the client, they brought out this hair on fire report saying we have 12 years to get our house in order. And that's not 12 years and then get your house in order. That's 12 years to get your house in order. And keep in mind, this is just a prediction. These guys, for the most part, have no way to know things that may drive the climate up faster than what they are predicting. Drivers, things like methane leaks. Maybe once the ice melts, the higher absorption rate of the heat. Guy McPherson was on the channel and even made the point clear that if we stop using fossil fuels tomorrow, there's 10 years of heat still built into the process itself. And the fossil fuels created somewhat of a dimming effect, meaning that the heat will jump up almost immediately once those fossil fuels are stopped use. Such a weird thing. In one respect, they're creating a dimming effect, keeping the temperature down a degree or so, while simultaneously creating a situation that is skyrocketing the temperature. And the habitable species dying off, we're talking about a mass die-off. They were skittish about using the word extinction event, but mass die-offs all across the world. This is being done by human-driven behavior. This is not an act of God. This is us on this planet doing things that is going well beyond any level of sustainability. We are a ball hurling through the cosmos. That's real. This planet, this table, this chair, that person, real. Cash is not. Cash in this process is not a real thing. You could imagine that with existence itself at stake, that's not me putting it that way. This is the climate scientists putting it that way. Our existence itself, we are talking about a catastrophe. We are a ball hurling through the cosmos. And for all intents and purposes, this is an asteroid that's going to hit the planet. So of course, the candidates that are running for presidency are going to have a say-so in this. People are going to ask them, hey, what are your policies? What are your policies? What are you going to do with climate change? What are you going to do with climate change? Sanders has been very clear in what he wants. He wants to push for a Green New Deal. And you would imagine that his type of Green New Deal will be more towards the lefty trend. Joe Biden is asked about this, and Biden comes up with a middle-of-the-road position. I am going to make the case that this is transcendentally ludicrous, utterly absurd on its face. Now, I can't necessarily knock a person for something that they may have in their heads, but the moment that I get the capacity to compare it to something real, then we have a conversation. Joe Biden's middle-of-the-road position is utterly ludicrous. Let's talk about it. So, Joe Biden has come out with this notion of a middle-of-the-road position. Now, I find this to be somewhat absurd. 12 years. That is a stunning pronouncement of sorts. 12 years to get your house in order. 12 years with existence itself, human existence, at stake. Is Joe Biden going to try to save existence on the cheap? And is that what we really want to do, to try to preserve existence on the cheap? And what does it say about us? If cash matters so much that we deify this thing, worshiping at the altar, that even existence itself is deemed less than or subordinate to. AOC has been pushing for a Green New Deal. She has been very clear and unequivocal that that is what she wants. Sanders has signed on to this notion of the Green New Deal. Biden has not. The problem is this. If you, Joe Biden, tells me, or if any Democrat, that you believe in science, meaning I believe in the scientific method, I believe these guys that build our boats, our planes, that explain our stars, that explains relativity, explains these quantum mechanical properties, explains this equation, the relativistic equation that allows our satellites to beam this signal to the various locations around the planet in general, that builds our networks, that do all of these things, these magnificent, amazing things that to not know any better would come across as magic. But in explaining these things, now they explain this one inconvenient thing. And all of a sudden, it's now a political conversation and a political discussion. What is the position of the candidates? And can you really call yourself a middle-of-the-road position? What does it mean when the middle-of-the-road position is a radical proposition, considering that position is somewhat of a death knell for the planet and the people on it? What does that mean? I'm making the point that this is essentially the position of one Mr. Joe Biden. As if this planet is not floating through space. As if this is not the real aspect of this. Not necessarily the cash that it seems Joe Biden is trying to preserve. Ocasio Cortez hit Biden on this point. She gave an amazing go after him because, like I said, she's pushing for the Green New Deal. And this notion that you're going to take a middle-of-the-road approach when scientists are saying you have 12 years, that seems like utter lunacy. And that is literally what she hit him on. And thank God she hit him on it, because that is absolutely what she should do. Let's take a look at her video. Now, Joe Biden was asked about this later on, but his response was rather weak. But I want to go to her response or her video on this, because her video nails it. Like, you can't make this case of saying, I believe in science and I believe in scientific method and technology, and I believe the scientists when they're talking about this because they're just, for the most part, using research. And even if I am wrong, even if I'm wrong, I get a cleaner world. If you're wrong, you're talking about catastrophe. And it seems that people are taking political positions on this as opposed to just basically listening to the science and looking for a results-driven solution. My point is, middle of the road is an ideological choice. That is not a results-driven solution. That is not a solution that tries to actually deal with the issue itself in real world terms. Not this Paris Accord. Not this notion of the capitalist, piecemeal around the edges. No, actually trying to deal with the issue, especially when you're at the point where you're talking about existence itself is at stake. Let's listen to AOC.
Too much for me is the fact that in 1989, the year that I was born, the year that many of us were born, and in years after and right before, that politicians were first informed by NASA, that Congress was first notified by NASA that climate change was going to threaten my life and everyone here's life to come, and they did nothing. That is too much.
She's slightly wrong on this. It's not that they did nothing. They turned around and attacked the science. And it wasn't just NASA, by the way. Those scientists who, are out there libs and are trying to change the world. No, it wasn't just them. Take a look at this. Exxon themselves, when doing experiments, came to the same conclusions that NASA came to, that climate change was going to be an issue. When they've taken readings on this recently, it was worse than they expected. This is why they had this hair on fire report, because it was worse. As they look at it, it gets worse. Even Donald Trump's own climate report shows Earth's temperatures going into some insane levels by 2100. Donald Trump's report just says you can't do anything about it, so you just got to kind of live with it. Why bother doing anything if you can't do anything? It's a circular argument. Exxon already knew, and they attacked the science. Capitalistic impulse. You got to maximize your profit. And fact of the matter is, if people start getting on this kick about trying to save the world because, climbing it all, that downs our profits. So, we have a fiduciary responsibility to attack the science and do whatever we need to do, either by politicians or going after and turning this into a political discussion, something that really was just a scientific argument. Of course, she's right. I guess my point is, it was worse than that. Because after being informed that this is going to dramatically affect the lives of people going forward, this is a military threat, by the way, that the Pentagon takes into account, they still did nothing. And you get into this question of why did they did nothing? And I would make this argument that the deification of cash, there's established interests that will be materially harmed if our world changed into a sustainable world as opposed to this world driven by consumption and greed. Do you realize we have a situation where the majority of the globe is dirt poor, living off of $8, $10 a day or under $10 a day, and many of them living even $2 a day. Our view from the United States is not indicative of the rest of the world. And you look at the level of consumption, and I'm guilty of this. When we were traveling, there was a situation where I had like maybe one pair of pants, two pair of pants, and maybe a couple of shirts. Didn't miss it at all. I get back here and you find, oh my God, look at all this clutter. We have this weird consumption-based economy that allows certain people to make profits. And not just certain people to make profits. The consumption is the driver that allows jobs. Meaning the moment that people don't consume, people start losing jobs. Isn't that such a weird economy? That in a society where climate change is an issue, where overconsumption is an issue, where inequality, meaning as one overconsumes, you have other parts of the world that completely have less. Think of a Hunger Game-esque society. And the world's at stake. And the band keeps playing. The band keeps playing. Let's let her finish, because she's making a really good point.
What is too much for me?
That life on Earth is at stake. And they did nothing.
Is the fact that in 1989, the year that I was born, the year that many of us were born, and in years after and right before, that politicians were first informed by NASA, that Congress was first notified by NASA that climate change was going to threaten my life and everyone here's life to come, and they did nothing. That is too much for me. And I will be damned if the same politicians who refused to act then are going to try to come back today and say we need a middle of the road approach to save our lives. That is too much for me. We cannot, and we will not accept anything less than a solution to save ourselves. And that's exactly what this is.
Understand what we're saying here. Existence itself, human existence on this planet, is at stake. Her point is, this is not an ideological thing. This is a scientific thing. This is not about putting through something just to put through something. We're not putting our heads under the desk in a nuclear explosion, essentially these wooden desks. No, the whole point of this is to solve this issue, to come to a solution, to try to find some way to work with the rest of the world and come to real world terms and stopping or dealing with this particular issue. Whether that's with science, meaning trying to find some kind of scientific solution to pull stuff out of the atmosphere, or whether that's through some other means. I'm making this very specific point, though, that going with this notion of a middle-of-the-road solution when your life is at stake. There's an asteroid that's going to hit the planet, but Joe Biden has a middle-of-the-road solution into solving that particular crisis. He's going to save us on the cheap. He's going to save us on the cheap. Yeah, this hits directly at Joe Biden. she should have hit directly at Joe Biden, because what Joe Biden is saying here is utterly and entirely, transcendentally ludicrous. Ludicrous. Either you fix the issue or you don't. Either you try to solve the issue or you don't. There's no middle ground in this particular case. It's not a radical proposition to try to solve a particular problem or a particular crisis, especially when life on planet Earth is at stake. This is not me saying it. This is the scientists saying it. We're having mass die-offs. We're having climate abnormalities in regards to this kind of spike in temperatures on this planet. And the band keeps playing. The band keeps playing. It's amazing. Do you realize how weird that is of a thought process or a system where survival itself is at stake? And a system, because it prioritizes cash and profit, even life on itself is subordinate. That's such a bizarre thing. Such a bizarre thing. It's as if they don't necessarily believe it, or for the most part, it wouldn't apply to them because they're going to be dead by the time the consequences come. But either way, however this takes place, shouldn't there be some evaluation on whether or not a system that would allow itself to be utterly and entirely destroyed, as opposed to being able to make substantive changes to fix itself? Shouldn't that system be held with a certain degree of suspicion? It's like a death cult. Ocasio Cortez nailing Joe Biden on this nonsense about a middle-of-the-road approach to dealing with a climate catastrophe. Thanks all.